cook it with emotion. Yeah, treat it like it's sacred, like it's sacred.
But inclusion is so important that we think about including everyone. And I know I don't believe anybody excludes the disabled intentionally, but it happens a lot. And, you know, from our perspective, there's a lot of things that you can do that are really simple. And mobility camp, we've been trying to do that on the playa for a number of years. And if I can figure out how to screen share, I've got a little video to show you. Yeah. So I'm Rat Lady, I'm disabled, I'm a widow, I'm an artist, I'm an art student at the present time. And I have friends who've been going to Burning Man for 25 years. And for 15 years, they would bring home pictures and stories, and it was awesome. And it was always followed by, but you could never do Burning Man in a wheelchair. And so for 15 years, I didn't, until one of my friends did something stupid and lost their driver's license and asked, oh, if there's any way you could figure out how to do it, I'll buy your ticket if you'll drive my van. And so then I seriously started looking, because then I thought, well, you know, is it possible? And discovered Mobility Camp. And that's really been my home ever since. And my passion is that nobody else wastes even a year listening to someone tell them that Burning Man is impossible because of their challenges. And so that's my passion. I'll also tell you, we don't just serve the disabled. We also serve the walking wounded, those folks who were not disabled before they got to Burning Man. We loan out wheelchairs, walkers, crutches, knee scooters. We have had in the past a couple hand cycles. We caution people with those. If you're not used to using a hand cycle, we'd recommend you only take it out for a couple hours, because if you're not used to using those muscles and you use them, you're going to be in pain for the next few days. But that's part of what we do as well. And burners are some hardcore people. We've had people that broke a hip during build week, went to Reno, got a hip replacement, came back, and we loaned them a wheelchair. So, yay, here we go. Mobility Camp has been here a very long time. This is Mobility Camp's 22nd year. And we serve probably 1,500 burners in the span of the week. This is our tractor, 1941 Gibson tractor, a trailer, and we take people out 3 or 4 times a day to see the art. This is our passion, is making sure that everybody who wants to come to Burning Man can have what they need to be self-reliant. This year we have a special tour with Captain Billy on his big yellow bus at dawn. He serves coffee and muffins and croissants. For a long time, there was this sense that, oh, you can't do Burning Man in a wheelchair. That's not true. Absolutely can't. You just have to know how. We have a whole section on our website. Playa dust is not only caustic and corrosive, it's conductive even when it's dry. So if it gets into your electronics, it's going to short them out. So you have to know how to prep it. It's just a real privilege to be able to take people out, mobility impaired or not. Come out here and enjoy. And we want to take you on a tour. Through the shiny tour, because ours are participant group. I want to go look at that. Okay, we'll go look at that. I want to touch that. Okay, we'll stop and get off and touch that. I want to stay at the temple for 10 minutes. Okay, we'll stay at the temple for 10 minutes. And the next one goes out at 6 o'clock. So that gives you a little idea of what we do at Mobility Camp.
Sorry, I have some tears coming out.
Well, I won't throw it to you next, ClemClem. Thank you, Rat Lady. How about Chris Hainsworth, aka Toto?
Hey everyone. I apologize in advance. My Wi-Fi is terrible right now, so I hope you can hear me okay. I may switch my video off just if that persists. But so Blind Burners was conceived in 2019 when I went with the co-founder Adi Latif, who's my housemate and the person I most wanted to share Burning Man with, and who began losing his eyesight from the age of 7. So that experience involved being kicked out of art class, no longer be able to play video games, all kinds of like quite traumatic experiences. And Adi's one of the most extraordinary. Blind Burners is founded around our friendship and around like values of shared interest in mental health, stupidity, and nudging ourselves out of our comfort zones. And those are the touchstones that we come back to through our friendship. And we had a great time at Black Rock City. We met Dani, and Dani was really kind when we reached out to we were figuring out how to navigate Black Rock City when you can't see. To me, there's 2 layers of that. There's the functional aspect of getting around, like and we have some thoughts on how regional burns can make themselves more accessible to visually impaired people. But ultimately, it's about art and self-expression. And the question I asked quite frequently was, how does serendipity work when you can't see? So that's a really interesting question for me to come back to. One of the pleasures of the playa is cycling and throwing yourself at the mercy of possibilities. How does that work if you can't see? But we were really born in 2020 with the multiverse. And my response to like minor traumas of lockdown was to find like-minded spirits online, dance with on Zoom. I remember dancing in my bed with a red tutu and connecting with a friend in Reno, and just her gaze just like healed like something that was like a bit of heartache that I had. And so an obsession for me was dancing with strangers on Zoom, and it being Burning Man, the strangers are going to dress up as lobsters. So how does that work when you can't see? And so when people like Arthur Mamumani, who built the temple, announced that he was going to build in VR. Now, my friend Adi is an incredible guitar player, and we were doing our own parties on Zoom with the Co-Reality Collective, who went on to create the Sparkleverse. And the beauty of that platform is it has a very low barrier to entry, real focus on the imagination and imagining the journey, and it allows us just all to focus on connection and creativity. So Blind Burners chose to host our camp on Zoom last year, but and we had a lot of fun. We're an art-led camp, we're a performance-led camp. We occasionally get activists around encouraging people to make things accessible, and we feel very deeply that inclusion without accessibility is pretty diluted. But we're an art-led camp. We have queerlesque performers, we have all kinds of artists and performers, and ultimately we just want to express ourselves. But we have to kind of agitate a bit to get digitally included. And that is particularly acute with virtual reality, because people have this assumption that, if you're disabled in different respects, it doesn't work. And it absolutely can work. And so like underlying the kind of the prankster nonsense that we will get up to in our camps, we are connected like with AltSpace, with Microsoft. My day job is in film and video game. And our goal really is to make online virtual, the VR experiences, not just accessible to people who are visually impaired or deaf. Like we're connected with the deaf community, and we want our work to be, we sometimes we want to cooperate ultimately. But yeah, we want to create experiences that we can all have. So we will host a room in AltSpace VR. AltSpace is totally inaccessible to visually impaired people. And before I just finish, I just want to speak briefly about like the pyramid. And I think we're all familiar with that pyramid where like getting through the door and having food and shelter is the bottom of the pyramid, right? And then as we get higher up, we start to self-express and do art. And we all want to be here. But right now, if you're visually impaired, you cannot get through the door of BRCVR on the AltSpace platform. You cannot get through the door. And so we intend to build, we want to bring our art. So a bunch of visually impaired artists who are literally excluded from Black Rock City VR. And we love BRCVR, by the way. Absolutely, so much time for Athena and the team there. But it needs to be accessible because it's not very cool that it's not. Yeah, but thanks, Aaron, so much for inviting us.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm trying to share. There we go. I shared the link for the Blind Burners website. So thank you, Chris. So we'll add so much there, and both of what you've shared and Rat Lady I want to dive into later. I'd like to ask, I guess, ClemClem now to introduce yourself, please, and just give us a quick sense of what your history as a burner is, and and what you do at Nowhere.
My name is ClemClem. I live in France. I discover Burning Man community, of course, with Burning Man on video. Then one friend told me about Crème Brûlée, which is the French local burn. And I just live 50 kilometers away from it. So I say, hey, I have free time, so let's go. So I jump in. And just after that, I discover that the biggest burn I can go around is Nowhere in Spain. So I just say, Burning Man is too far away from me yet, and it's too much logistic. But Nowhere is not far away, and I can do it. So let's try. So I bring my RV to Nowhere, and I send a message on Facebook page to say, hey, I'm going to come. Are you aware that accessibility exists and we need some help sometimes? So let's talk about it. And so I just put a long message on the page, on the Facebook page. And then I come to Nowhere, and everybody know me before going on site, because everyone has seen as my message, my post, and everyone talked to me about accessibility and wheelchair and stuff like that. So I was known before I know anyone. So it was a good example of inclusion. That was the first year, and the next year I jumped in the organization to be a leader of inclusion, because I jumped in at the last moment to my first Nowhere, and it was too late to do anything. So the next year I jump in to make the change I need happen. So I jump in. I was co-lead, and I only take care of people with wheelchairs. And I have also other leads who take care only of people with neurodivergence, and another one who take care only of parents and children. So we have this inclusion department where we work together, and mainly answering emails about people who have questions. They contact us on the website, and we start to talk with them about who they are, what we need, what they need, and what they don't know they need. Because if they came on the website, it's because they don't know the event yet. So we just talk, and we tell them what they could need. And if they understand what the place is, they can decide by themselves how to be self-reliant. So we just help them to be self-reliant. And on the organization itself, we work inside our organization to to work everyone together and just to say, hey, here you can just build without step because it will be not accessible for a wheelchair user. And here you can do this or that because it will help everyone. And so we did it.
Thank you. One of the things you touched on, I think, was a theme in the conversations that the four of us had prior, or five of us had prior to this event, which was that to help other people, both at Burning Man and at regional events, to begin to grow better at accessibility, there are different tiers of effort that are required. And the lowest tier and the most accessible, the easiest one to switch on, is just information, is providing more information out to your community and campmates and possible campmates or possible attendees about the state of things. And that adding that additional information layer can be so helpful. I mean, that's a lot of the work that I do through Burning Wish, working with getting cancer patients to Burning Man, is informational. It's not actually the logistics of getting them a ticket or getting them a motorhome to camp in or getting them a caregiver. It's the conversation initially to find out what their situation is, what their risks are, what their concerns are, and to translate that into, oh, well, here's information about Burning Man, because you've probably, many of them have never been before, or if they have, they've never been going through that situation. And so I can help by saying, oh, that thing you're concerned about, we can take care of that. That won't be a problem. This other thing that you haven't mentioned may be a serious issue and you need to be aware of it, and we need to maybe do some things to plan for it, or maybe this means that it's not actually going to work for you to attend at all. So when thinking about this in terms of your own projects, really that layer of just providing information, as ClemClem said, they don't know what they can't know. They don't, a photograph of the event site that is designed to promote the event may not indicate to a chair user whether the terrain is actually reasonably navigable in a chair or not, right? And so just thinking about some of those questions will help you better, and speaking to disabled people who have these needs will help you better communicate out what they need to know. Rat Lady, yeah.
I'd also like to add one of the really important things for people that use electrical medical equipment. They need to know, is there electricity available there? If there is not, can I bring a generator? Where can I set up my generator? What hours can I run it? Because if you have a restriction on generators running at night, that could be a serious problem for someone who uses a CPAP machine, or a wheelchair user who has to charge their wheelchair overnight. So all of those kind of things are critically important for them to be able to prepare themselves adequately to be at your event.
ClemClem?
When I jump in at nowhere the first time, I didn't find much information in the survival guide. So the next year I update it with all the information I got, who was useful. And I also update the how to build a camp guide for everyone to just know how to build an accessible shower, for example. Because it's one of the main issue for wheelchair user is to bring all the equipment you need to build a shower. It's a very big logistics. And I also help people to have access to electricity and to a power plug socket, so they can bring their CPAP tools and electric wheelchair charging station and things like that. And also electric bike, because in my own situation I use CPAP and also electric bike, and I have a friend who use electric wheelchair. So just for at least the two of us, we need a power plug socket. So we did it. we found a place in a free camp where we can plug a socket for people who need it. And we do a lot of stuff like that to help people to be self-reliant.
I think this is probably a good time to go to Stan. And Stan, if you could introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Stan Clawson. My playa name is Stan Clawson. I just never got a playa name. Maybe that needs to change, but until then, personal pronouns are he, him. So my Burning Man story started back in 2000 when my aunt told me about Burning Man. So this was really pre social media. The internet was still, fairly new, and she'd taken a disposable camera to the burn. And so we're literally looking at sort of these analog photographs of the playa. And it just completely captured my imagination. But it took another 9 years until I was dating a girl who said, I go to the burn, are you interested? And I said, yes, I am. And my first burn was in 2009. And I actually, in preparation for it, knowing that radical participation was a key concept, I sought out mobility camp because I was, number one, interested in accessibility on the playa. Even though my aunt said, yeah, I don't see, it's flat, so I don't see why it would be a problem. And the reason I wanted that information is because I have a spinal cord injury. So I actually use a wheelchair. And I've been paralyzed since 1996. Use a manual wheelchair. I have paraplegia. And so it's one of those situations where you're like, I really want to do this thing, can I? So I sought out mobility camp, started talking to some of the people involved with mobility camp online, and said, I'd love to come out and be a part of your camp and help out in any way that I can. And is it okay if my girlfriend and I join you? And so we did, and I met some amazing people. And I remember my first play experience, we hadn't even set up our tent yet. And they said, okay, we got to go. We're going to a magic show. Hop in this Santa sled, which was basically a converted motorized chair that looked like Santa's sleigh. And it was dusk, and I zipped across the playa, and I'm just like taking in Black Rock City as the lights are starting to come on and the nightlife is starting to come alive. And I was just like, what in the hell is this? And I'm in a Santa sleigh. And I was sold. That was it. I knew it was possible. I knew you could do it in a wheelchair. And I was blown away at just the hospitality and the care that mobility camp provided for citizens on the playa with disabilities. So that was my first year. I did, I guess, 9 consecutive years after that, or 10 or 8 consecutive years, so 9 total. And I kind of wanted to do other things. So I only did mobility camp the one time, but every time I'd see the trailer, I got so excited, or I'd bump into old people that I knew on the playa. And then I got involved in my local Burning Man community, and I got involved in another camp. And so people were very aware, even in our local community, that I was involved. And just knowing somebody with a disability, and one is, obvious as mine, where I use a wheelchair, suddenly you begin to think about Burning Man and or regional events through the lens of accessibility. And in 2015, I decided to join the board of directors for our local Burning Man, which actually is in Utah, not Nevada. It's Element 11. And I started out as it was a self-titled position, the Ballyhoo Captain. So I did all of the marketing, I did all of the promotion, I did the video production, and I just, get everybody excited. And then my last year on the board, I served as the chairman for Element 11. But during my entire tenure, I said, first and foremost, we got to make this accessible. And we need to make accessibility a priority, because accessibility is not necessarily just ability. right? Accessibility is how do you let people feel safe? How do you provide an experience to everybody? And so one of the things we did is I made sure that any event that we had as a regional burn, if it was a fundraiser or if it was, you know, just a small mini burn or something like that, they all had to have accessible porta potties. They all had to be accessible. And we even implemented in our applications, any artists who were going to be applying to do a build or to bring art, we asked if there was an accessible component to their piece, and if there wasn't, would that be an option? And so that, I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more, is this idea of accessible art and what does that mean, and should it be a requirement? Is that even possible? Or, you know, is there a way to have an accessible component that could be in addition to whatever the original piece is? So we started to think about all those things, and it's really spread into everything that our community has done, where now, you know, we have organizations providing art like Meow Wolf in Salt Lake City, and I'm working with them to make sure it's accessible. So this idea that's sort of bleeding from Burning Man into the default world of making art accessible is really my passion, and figuring out ways to make it accessible. But I will tell you that I was blown away with really how accessible Burning Man could be. But I also learned that we still, right, we want to get to the top of the pyramid. And I think we have a lot more discussions to have about accessibility. But what Burning Man just in 2009 alone did is it provided access, and not only provided, but they were aware of it. And that just was everything for me. That said everything I needed to know about an event like Burning Man. So yeah, that's sort of my experience.
Thank you. And the thing that, I mean, a couple things stand out about that, but one, that experience you had that was so, I mean, it sounds, I think everyone will recognize that as a quintessential first time on Playa, fucked up, magical, arriving at Burning Man welcome story, right? And yours wasn't any different because of access issues. I mean, you know, we've all experienced other ways in which limited accessibility has caused us all problems, but that one moment wouldn't have been possible without, at that point, a number of years, you know, some 10 or more years of Mobility Camp already voluntarily, organically, emergently producing this, you know, recognizing this need for this support and this service and producing it. So it's kind of magical that, you know, you were able to step in and get the benefit of that work. And it feels very much like pushing it forward and making this more integral to both the Big Burn and all the regionals will help facilitate that same thing for the next wave of new burners, right? And more so.
Absolutely.
So, Rat Lady, 1 second. I've just noticed that a bunch of you are asking questions in the chat. I'm sorry we haven't gotten to those. We're going to do a Q&A towards the end. But if you have something that's specifically like on topic to that can't wait or relevant, I will now be watching and try and get that inserted in. So Rat Lady, yes?
Okay, I wanted to share with you guys just how important inclusion is in the context of the regionals. That's a lot of people's very first introduction into Burning Man. And I want to tell you about an experience I had a number of years ago, and I'm hoping and believing that things are different now. But we had talked about seeing if we could expand our camp services into some of the regionals. And so I contacted a regional promoter and he said, don't bother, our event is not accessible and we have no plans to make it accessible. And what that said really, really clearly to me was, we don't want your kind here. So be aware of the message you're sending if you're not accessible. You're saying to people, we are excluding you because we don't give a shit about you. We don't want you to be part of our community. And I don't think any burner consciously wants to send that message.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's obviously pretty disappointing. I mean, I think that sucks, and screw that guy. I think we've spoken about this. That's no longer a regional event anymore. But as it should be, probably for that, and I'm guessing now a lot of other reasons. But still, there is an ongoing tension that I think we've all seen between the kind of this notion of radical inclusion being an umbrella for accessibility, that we don't have radical inclusion without full, as accessibility in every way that is possible for us to achieve and deliver for each other, right? Coming into conflict with that sort of read the back of your ticket, Burning Man is danger camp, and it's up to you, that radical, self-reliance principle. And one of the things that's come out from all of our conversations this week preparing for that is that that's really a false dichotomy. When you speak to the actual, people who are actually disabled, that's not, those things aren't in conflict. Something that Rat Lady said that stuck with me was that we're not asking for you to make Burning Man easy. We're asking for you to make,
do it for them. That's not what we're asking.
They're just asking to make it possible. It's still going to fuck your day. Burning Man is, unless you're, spending $1 million and going into a fully isolated encampment at Burning Man where maybe you never emerge, I don't think it's possible to insulate yourself from the playa kind of causing you challenges, causing you difficulty and emotional, transmutation and all the nonsense jackassery and stuff that Burning Man just delivers spontaneously. And honestly, I would imagine that a lot of those burners get it too in a different way than maybe they expected, right? But yeah, disabled burners are just asking for it to be made possible, not for it to be made easy. And it's not in conflict with, radical self-reliance at all. And that's something that they all have different views on, and what I'd like to talk about more. I don't know we're gonna have time in this session, but just to make that point. So let's see. This is probably a good time for a question. Let's see, what was, do you ask theme camps to include accessibility in their structure plans after? That's a good question. Molly asked, do you ask theme camps to include accessibility in their structure plans applications for directed group sale tickets? I don't actually know the answer to that. Is anyone here from Burning Man or from ticketing that knows?
Sorry, could I just clarify the question really quickly?
Yeah, please.
I believe a number of people on the call were members of leadership at regional burns. So hearing from the Burning Man org is great if anybody has the answer, but I mostly was interested in understanding like how accessibility fits into theme camps at any burn, if that makes sense.
Got it. That's probably a good question for ClemClem. As far as I know, having an actual inclusion department is, if not, the first of its kind. It's possibly the only of its kind, but nowhere, as far as I know, is the first one to have a dedicated inclusion team. So, of which ClemClem is the lead. So, can you speak to that a little bit? Like, how do you approach it at Nowhere?
Can you just repeat the question, Molly, because I don't really understand it because my sound was cutting.
Yeah. So I'm interested in understanding how, if any mechanisms are in place to help theme camps specifically be more accessible, or like if this is a question that when a theme camp is applying to be a part of Nowhere, for example, is there an accessibility discussion at that point, or do kind of like what Stan was talking about with or maybe it was Rat Lady about like, is it possible for this art project to be accessible? Do you guys ask those same questions of theme camps? Was my question. Sorry if a roundabout recap what that was.
For team camp, we have updated how to build a team camp guide. So we help them to at least know that they need to think about it. Because we just write black and white thing to make it accessible. So if they plan to put steps, we just explain that steps is not a good thing to do, and you can always do it without steps. For example, if you build something on top of your container, but it's okay, because we can't force you to don't do it. So it's both sides of it, but we help them to do it the more accessible we can. For the art car, we didn't put fit in it yet, in that subject, because it's more something artsy, and I just never step in the artsy subject yet, because there is a lot of subject everywhere, and my time is limited. So yet I didn't have put a fit in the art project, but it will be on the table for next year. We have still a lot of work to do. We still need more people to get involved in the inclusion department. But we try step by step to make it better, and we still have a lot of work to do. So we try to do our best, and we take notes for next year to improve it. Because when one thing is done 1 year, we try to do it the next year automatically. So every steps is a good steps.
So one of the things Rat Lady added to that is that it's also important to make the severely disabled be able to bring attendance. And this is something that, so my work, I should briefly introduce myself. I'm Aaron Muszalski. I'm a longtime burner, volunteer, DPW member, and builder of the city. In 2016, I had stage 4 cancer and went through chemotherapy. And now I have chronic fatigue and a cognitive impairment called chemo brain. So one of the things that you'll, incidentally, one of the things you'll notice talking to a lot of these people is that while they may have a primary disability, that doesn't mean that we also aren't necessarily neurodivergent or have, you know, are spoonies or have other like stacked things that make our situations more complicated. But in 2017, the year after my cancer treatment, I founded a group called Burning Wish. And what we do is help bring cancer patients and survivors, and including also terminal patients, to Burning Man. And a lot of that, as I said earlier, is informational, helping them understand what is involved. And then there's a logistical component and a support component, both before and on Playa. We can connect them with tickets, host camps that want to give them space in their camp or who have meal plans, caregivers, we can get them tickets for their caregivers. And most of this comes out, you know, all of this really now comes through donations from the community to support this. We get them, if they need it, shelter. And so far we've brought over 30 people to Burning Man from all over the world, and ranging in age from 19 to 67. And including, as I said, several terminal patients, and about 2/3 have never been to Burning Man before. And so far, everyone's had an incredible time and been, you know, I mean, they went to Burning Man. We meet up, there's an annual cancer walk that meets up Wednesday at the Man, and I invite them to attend that walk if they want. And it's so great to see them all, because for some of them, unless they need much more high touch support, for more independent recipients, that's the first time in the event I'll have actually physically met them or seen them. And it's so fun to watch them all come up and like the look on their face. I'm like, how's it going? They're like, this place is, but there was a giant snail and I wrote a thing and no one's going to ever believe me. And I'm like, you went to Burning Man. Good job. But to Rat Lady's point about bringing attendance, we have from the very start always insisted that people come with at least one family member, friend, or professional caregiver, and have always, we don't just allocate a single ticket, we always allocate at least two. Though we have not yet assisted anyone who's severely disabled, that can also often, for those people, that could be two tickets, right? Like two additional tickets for someone to be a caregiver during the day and a second shift at night. But again, the numbers that we're talking about are so small relative to the population of the event, or even to a regional, that making that affordance it's really not going to impact anything, right? You make it available, you're not going to have, 100 people or 1,000, well, you hopefully have 100 people, but you're not going to have thousands of people demanding free or subsidized tickets for this affordance. The intersection of people who have severe assistive needs who want to go to Burning Man is not that great. So consider that. Mobility Camp also section more, yeah. So resources, Rat Lady has mentioned resources, and one of the things that we're collectively excited to share with you all and with the larger community is that we've been working to share all of the resources that we've been putting together, that ClemClem has already done for Nowhere, Rat Lady has done. Everyone has their own sort of stack of recommendations, and we're sharing it, we'll be sharing it at this Slack community called Burning Accessibility. And you're all welcome to join that. I think we'll probably be making a community for this on Hive as well, but we need to look into that. But there's the Slack link to join. And the idea behind that is that there's many different groups doing this work. There are a couple that we hope to get for this panel, but weren't able to in time, including people who at the Camp Da Dirty Hands, which is a camp for deaf and hearing impaired burners. And everyone has now their stack of things that they've learned and guidelines of how to think better about accessibility for Burning Man events. And those aren't really shared in one central place. So if you're an organizer for a regional and you don't want to have to reinvent this all from ground zero, from the start, hopefully this will be a great place to collect and share back out everything we've learned, and also to form community around the needs of all these different disabled communities. So let's see here. Something I wanted to ask ClemClem about in our conversation, something you mentioned that I just loved was one of the things that you were considering at Nowhere was for essentially Nowhere's version of Burning Man's Orgy Dome camp. How do they design their space to include beds or play spaces that are accessible to chair users or other physically disabled attendees? And I just that's such a perfect example of something that an able-bodied person wouldn't necessarily think of, but the moment someone suggests it, you're like, of course. Otherwise, what are they going to do? Have sex on the ground? That sucks. So it's something, and I mean, can you talk a little bit more about that, ClemClem?
Yes, I wanted to add to my previous intervention is that when we have somebody who has needs in a camp, we also often contact the camp and see with them, we talk with them how we can improve the camp, what are their plan to how they want to build their camp, and we help them to see if there is something we can do to help them in the organization, and if we need to help them to contact the person and who has needs. So we talk together to improve what they can do for their own users. And as part of that, I also contact many camps to see what they can do for us and for me too. So this for this camp, it was the camp next to mine, and they launched a crowdfunding for a place to make a sex positive camp. So I get in contact with them, and I just ask them how they want to build the camp. So I jump in and I just say, hey, I am interested in making accessible beds so we can have sex like everyone else in your camp, because if you go on the Nowhere Playa, there is nowhere a place where you can have sex accessible. So last year I searched for it, but I didn't find anyone. So this year you make this, so please do it accessible. So we did, and we bring accessible bed in the organization place where people get sick and overwhelmed by things happening. So we bring I bring some mattress for pressure sore prevention also on site. I did a lot of things like that to improve everything we can, and we gift a mattress to everyone who wants at least one for their camp. And I don't remember what I wanted to say.
You got were those mattresses donated, or how did you get those?
Oh, I just contact my local medical supplier, and I said them we want to make an accessible camp in a festival, and we need mattress, and they just says okay, how many do you need? I says 20, and they give me 20, so I bring them back to Nowhere on my trailer and just give them to everyone who needs it.
We needed some insulated tents for some of our recipients, and reached out to ShiftPod and told them what we were doing, and they just instantly, I mean, this was a change of plans because someone decided they wanted to be in a tent instead of an RV, and someone else needed that RV. So we, like a week before Burning Man, needed an insulated tent, and ShiftPod just overnighted them to us. Like, just, okay, we'll send you, go ahead, there you go. So, I mean, a lot of times just asking will get you surprisingly far. Chris, oh, yes, Rat Lady?
Just real quick, I also wanted to mention something that I know is kind of scary, but for those of you that have events in the United States, if you are a 501c3 or an LLC and you charge admission, by law, you are required to be accessible. Now, I know from dealing with ADA people, if they see you making a concerted effort and you have a plan on how you can move toward continuing to be more and more accessible, that is going to go a huge long way if someone were to file an access complaint against you under the ADA law. So just something to consider. Hopefully no Burning Man associated event will ever get an ADA complaint, but it's a possibility.
It's worth pointing that out, because to some extent, we've all been lucky so far that everyone has approached this sort of in a more community spirit. And you know, when they've encountered problems, they decided, like ClemClem, to create an inclusion team, or like Rat Lady, you know, and your predecessors, to create an entire camp. But not everyone, you know, where there's no guarantee, nor should there necessarily be an expectation that the people who need these affordances have to do, you know, you shouldn't have to be an activist just because you're disabled. You know, you are legally entitled to access, period. But that means, you know, that those of us who do care and do have that bandwidth and do have access to larger networks of people, we can activate them around that need and say, hey, you know, I mean, look at the amount of insane resources, intense, overwhelming resources and logistical challenges that burners tackle every year in building their art projects or their theme camps. There's no reason why that same logistical sort of prowess and sort of willful strategic self-deception about how hard something's actually going to be can't be applied to improving accessibility. Right?
And burners,
it's just, yeah,
can get as creative about accessibility as they are about anything else. Yeah. Sarge, I can't remember the name of his camp, the one with the big Tesla coils. They have a bar that's like 30 feet in the air. They've taken myself and other people from my camp up to that bar. They put us in a rock climbing harness and get some burly guys on the rope and haul us up to the bar. And that's the kind of thing I would love to see more of.
Well, and sometimes, oh, go ahead.
I was at my very first regional in 2008. There was a guy there who himself was not disabled, but he was a wheelchair mechanic. And he had this awesome wheelchair with tracks and an elevated seat and flamethrowers. And God, that was fun to ride in.
Stan, you mentioned a story. I mean, sometimes it's just very simple, right? Like you mentioned your story. Could you share about the pier? And what year was that? 2014, something like that? 2013? Out of the group out of Nevada that made the pier sculpture.
Yeah, the pier sculpture was, so what I thought was really interesting about, there's something to be said.
Well, we just lost your audio.
Okay,
there you go, you're back.
There we go,
yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. So yeah, the interesting thing when we think about radical self-reliance, or we think about accessibility, is this idea that I think sometimes gets lost, which is how accessible can you be, and how independent can the person who is doing the access be? So when we think about radical self-reliance, if we're creating a playing field where a person can go out, and we talk a lot about this at Burning Man, of people going out and having their own independent experience, where you'll see people go out and sort of do I call it the rollabout, but the walkabout, where you go out by yourself and you do your own thing. I think that sometimes gets lost, because a lot of times we think, well, we'll just help you. Well, we'll help you. We'll pick you up. We'll carry you where you want to go. And it was actually the pier that I brought this up to somebody. I said, what's so amazing about the pier is when I'm rolling out, I'm going, I get out of my golf cart, and I said, I want to go to the pier. And the reason I wanted to go to the pier is I wanted to see if it was accessible. I'm like, for all intents and purposes, it should be. And I rolled right onto the pier, and I rolled right up to the very end of the pier, and I was just absolutely ecstatic. Not only was it accessible, I could do it independently. And I think the thing that sometimes gets lost with art, and I see it even in our regional, is somebody will say, oh, it's totally accessible. And there'll be a threshold. And even something that's 4 inches tall or 2 inches tall or even an inch tall can be the difference between having an experience and not having an experience for somebody. Because for a lot of individuals, not only with disabilities, but without disabilities, is if they feel like they can't get into somewhere, they just won't do it. And, you want to be able to access these pieces of art without having to ask for help. The art should be the access. It should be the experience. And so I talked about how amazing I thought the pier was, because I said, this is just one giant ramp. I love it. It's great, totally accessible. And I was blown away that it was moving in that direction. Now, there were a lot of other art pieces, but there are those art pieces, and I've talked about the man base being one of them. And when you literally create barriers in the man base, when you're building steps to get up to a deck to see the man, what does that say to somebody who has a mobility impairment? You're basically creating almost geographical or architectural segregation. And I don't like to use the S word, but it's literally saying, oh, well, if you want help, we can carry you up. Well, who wants to be carried in and out and moved around everywhere? No, you can build a ramp. If you can build a staircase, you can build a ramp a lot easier. And I would argue to the artist or the architect who says, well, it doesn't really fit in with the vision. It's like, really? Your artistic vision is dependent on the staircase to create the grand vision? I don't know. I think it's it is one of those areas that we have to be thinking about those things. And I think it really is important to encourage that creativity so we can say, you can have staircases up to your art project, but might you also consider an accessible route as well, in addition to? So
our camp has 2 obstacle courses. One you run in a wheelchair and one you run on crutches. And the first year we did it, we heard a lot of, oh man, I had no idea. But Monday morning, the second year, an artist came up to our camp and said, because I ran your obstacle course last year, this year my art is accessible. I had no idea that little wooden border I put around my piece made it completely inaccessible until I couldn't get over the fucking 1x2 in the obstacle course.
I mean, and this is a big point, is that it's very difficult to imagine. I mean, empathy requires that sort of shared visceral experience to understand, right? And I mean, no one's suggesting that, the majority of burners are malicious in, or are designing for segregation intentionally. It's just, I mean, we've all been there, it takes 1,000 things to go to Burning Man and 10,000 to do art there or have a theme camp or organize anything. And there's always, 900 of them are getting dropped on the floor, and we kind of hope to get the top ones. But no one's working for or prioritizing or owning stuff that they haven't experienced, haven't been told about, and have failed to imagine.
And as a regional, you have the ability to say, if you're building one of our major structures, it has to be accessible.
Yeah,
don't
just
turn in
as
a design that's not.
Because I mean, the majority of them are not going to be. I mean, at least for a time, right? But you could dictate, you could say, hey, we as a community agree that the key pieces of infrastructure must be. Stan, you had a comment?
Yeah, and to your point of it not being malicious, I absolutely agree with that. I think, I think it is it's a blind spot, right? And I think for a lot of people, they're like, we just didn't even think about that. And I think it is important for not only camps, but I think the bigger org, whoever is in charge of the event, to say, look, this is a priority for us. If we're going to really, if we're going to do the 10 principles, let's do the 10 principles. And, in terms of having that experience, one of the things that I think has been really interesting about the past year with the pandemic, not to bring up the P word, is I've now been talking to a lot of people, and I've said, it's been really interesting for me to look at the pandemic, because what I've seen is an entire world that suddenly didn't have access to something. Suddenly everybody had to stay indoors. Suddenly everybody couldn't go out to the restaurant that they wanted to go out to, or they couldn't go out and see other people. And look at how people were affected by that. They were angry, they were frustrated. And I said, yeah, doesn't that suck that you can't go out and have an experience?
Yeah, we've been given this perfect metaphor to activate people around, to actually, I mean, who knows how long that will last, but right now the majority of the world has a visceral memory of being denied agency in a major sustained way. And we can leverage that in convincing them to understand, or at least get a sense of why this matters.
Absolutely. And I mean, you can even say, you can't go to Burning Man this year. How does that make you feel?
Yeah.
Well, I wish I could access it. Yes.
Yes.
Wouldn't that be
ClemClem,
amazing to access Burning Man, to be able to go to Burning Man?
And in that same vein, make your volunteer opportunities accessible. Our camp has been lamplighters for the last 3 years. There is no reason your rangers cannot be differently abled. Your gate cannot be differently abled. You know, there's just so many things that people don't do, because when they ask, oh, well, you know, you're disabled, you can't do that job. And that's not true. I'm a regional ranger at 3 different regional events. So
so I see we have questions. Good point. I see we're running out of time. We have a comment from ClemClem, and I think a question from Miss Piggy, Ranger Miss Piggy. Let's do ClemClem first. What was your comment?
About
or were
what?
you just I thought maybe you were just adjusting your hair to look fabulous.
No, I want to add something, but I didn't remember what. So
all right, Miss Piggy, you had a question or comment.
I just wanted to add that though rangers are not as fully vested in the disabilities, we do have a large section of that is growing of both wheelchair blind, which has been really difficult. We have, I think now 5 or 6 deaf rangers. I personally am a bit more broken than needs to be, but they've accommodated my needs, and quite a few of, you know, if you look at our ranger population, it's a lot of older people. We have a lot of young ones, but we have a whole lot of old people. So we are working on that, and I know that we have a lot more space to grow in that.
I mean, that's a excellent point. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation happen, and we're going to continue it over the coming months and years, and together, and hopefully with more of you participating, is because this community is aging, and you know, more of us, you know, are going to have ability issues and illnesses, and we're going to want to keep burning. I mean, I went to Burning. You know, the reason I created Burning Wish was because I decided to go to Burning Man during chemotherapy twice. Once I didn't even have time to come home and shower. I went straight from the playa back to my infusion, covered in playa dust, thinking, oh, they'll probably send me home or something. And they didn't care. They swabbed off where they put the IV in, and it said, you're fine. But yeah, I mean, we're gonna, as an aging, I mean, it kind of sucks. I feel a bit, I wish it didn't have to be like, oh, right, now this affects me, so I care. Now I can see better that as we all grow older, we're going to need more thought given to how we support each other in our physical needs. But that's the reality of it. That's how you learn.
The best statement I've ever heard regarding that was telling someone why they wanted their house to be accessible. Look, we're able-bodied now, but we have no idea how long that's going to last. And we want a house we can live in the rest of our lives.
When I put my garden in at my house, I made the raised beds 2 feet up, and we have concrete walkways all the way around, because I knew that I needed 2 total knees. And in a way, I'm kind of glad the event was canceled this year, because looks like I have to do one of them because it's failed. So, you know, do plan ahead for that. You know, don't put yourself way out in the boonies. Don't take it and put yourself in a camp that's going to be too hard to get onto an art car or get to the destination point you want to be at. I mean, trash fence isn't so fun when you try to get out there when you're not walking so great, or you can't roll because of the moguls.
Yeah.
Stan has a comment, and before we really haven't had a chance to hear from Chris, so I'd like to make some time before we wrap up, because Chris, well, we'll get to that, but go ahead, Stan.
And I'll say this really quickly. You know,
Yeah.
you talked about aging populations and this idea of, you know, we're able-bodied now. Let's face it, at Burning Man, in any given night or day, people become less able. And I think when you can provide access, it benefits maybe those people who've had a little too much. And suddenly we start to rethink accessibility in terms of just permanent disability, and maybe say, okay, you're temporarily impaired right now. And man, isn't it nice that you can get around, right?
I mean, that brings up something that actually I'm surprised I didn't think to mention before. In talking about Burning Wish and looking at that experience of the 30 some people that we've helped get to the playa, as I said, we place them with host camps. We look for theme camps that are up and running, right? That have some infrastructure that can offer showers or water or even porta potties, because that might be, if someone's going through treatment, they may be immunocompromised. So going to the public porta potties, especially late in the week, is a terrible idea. So we want to get them some of these things, right? And what we've heard universally from everyone who hosted them and everyone who interacted with them is like, oh my God, that was a gift for us. That made our Burning Man experience better. I've even had a couple people, like we placed someone with a fairly well-off rich person camp. And they said, I'll be honest with you, I felt I kind of had to say yes to host the person. And I was a little worried that it would be a downer, that, having someone with cancer in our camp would kind of harsh the party vibe. And I can't tell you, meeting them, hearing their experience and getting to like have this sober engagement with mortality and the way they related to it absolutely transformed our burn and made the partying for all of us all the much better. Like they brought a lot to it, and they're like, yeah, I was kind of actually, honestly, I was a little apprehensive, but I will do this again every year. We loved it. Making your experience, making your camp more accessible isn't just a gift to the recipient. It makes the community better. It makes your experience better. I've seen that over and over again. So absolutely don't think about it only in terms of, oh, we're doing all this additional work just because we sort of have to. Like you get back as much, or, like most things at Burning Man, you get back more than you put into it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the question I had for Chris, in addition to founding Blind Burners, which I feel like is a kind of just a relatively young organization, just getting going, yeah? And so we expect great things, but your advocacy, because of your technology background, is already moving into the multiverse and into the virtual realm. And one of the things that stood out from our conversations was that there's this assumption that just because it's not a physical Burning Man space, that it's somehow magically accessible. And as you told me, that's not the case, that, you have to consider accessibility for virtual spaces as much as in the physical burns. Can you talk a little bit more about what that is and what you're doing in that area?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Aaron. I was listening also intently to your point just a moment ago about this not being, just to give us a warm, fuzzy feeling. And definitely it was a welcome reminder from Dani that it's the law. And, in the wider world, it's very good business, like insofar as Apple and Microsoft made their stuff accessible, it's extraordinarily good business. Before I'm addressing your question, if I may, really briefly,
please.
just like emphasize the importance of addressing accessibility in design. So Apple's innovation was accessibility first. You know, normally accessibility would come like 6 years later. And that particular company, I think, led a little bit in trying to build accessibility features in so that visually impaired people, for example, could use those phones from the beginning. But I just would emphasize that, like, after Black Rock City, me and Eddie had chats with lots of the artists who we'd loved, like Ben Langholtz and Stone 27. We met the crew who made that recreation of the Gale House, met a few other artists, and we had, like, you could see how much they were getting from that interaction, as well as, like, you know, Addy, my mate Addy, getting sparked, you know, to see the potential, his potential of being an artist. You know, we talked about that. But yeah, it's you very much, we want to be on the front foot presenting our art, and it's like this idea of co-creation, you know, and going to more interesting spaces because we've co-developed something. And so just really encouraging, whether it's the physical or the digital world, anyone who's building to, like, consult with a blind person, a partially sighted person, a deaf person, someone who's never seen before, someone who did see but lost their sight, and all of the other, you know, physical impairments and so on. And I just guarantee that it will be pretty much guarantee, with some money behind it, that it's like the biggest shot of creativity you'll get. And you will just see so many things that you can fix at design stage that you can't fix once you've started building. But yeah, just so really briefly on the physical world, the two main thoughts that we had were like Wi-Fi, and I know that contrasts like what all of us probably want for Black Rock City. We do not want Wi-Fi there, but Wi-Fi plus like smartphone features, if we could just cut it off with a password. And I think from talking to Burning Man, I think they're reconciled to Wi-Fi is gonna, or it's already there and will spread, but yeah, just if we could have Wi-Fi, and then the accessibility features of smartphones would make it a lot more easy for a visually impaired person to independently navigate. And the other thought in the physical world that would be lovely if people took away would be to make like models, 3D print models of like the man or like whatever artwork. And that's a really, really nice way, or of your camp, like a 3D model of your camp. That's a nice way for some visually impaired people will like that very much. Yeah. So really briefly on the digital stuff,
just a heads up, sorry to interrupt, Chris. I think we're 3 minutes past time, but you should finish that thought. But if people do, I want to let people know that if you want to bounce back to the main session for whatever's next. Oh, actually, there's a really good thing next, but just let you know about that. And maybe we can wrap up. Chris, please. And by the way, thank you all for coming.
Accessibility, they're more than welcome to reach out directly, and we can wrap with that. Yeah,
please, everyone in the space is doing good work.
Plenty of good stuff online as well. But yeah, thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, sorry for there's so much. It's a big topic, but obviously we've got a lot of people who are really passionate and thinking about it. So those resources out there, please reach out to them. We're going to try and do our best to centralize that, and everyone's going to still be doing their independent work, but hopefully this will be a community where people can go and ask those questions and get them answered. So thank you everyone so much for your time and all the experiences that you shared. Really appreciate it. So have a great event. Yeah. Thank you. Love you all. Take care.
Bye.
Cook it with emotion. Yeah, treat it like it's sacred, like it's sacred. Cook it with emotion. You gotta cook it, treat it like it's sacred. Gonna make some music together. Beautifuls, it is fantastic to see you again.